I wish there was a way to know you're in the good old days before you've actually left them.
Was it really better in the past? Sometimes we all tend to think that our life was more pleasant before, with more good memories and greater happiness. In a word, our life was better. However, this judgment is often false. If we were to imagine going back to that time, it probably wouldn't be better for us. We would instantly remember why it was worse back then. For example, broken relationships with your loved one. Often, after a breakup, people thinking with regret about what happened. They feel like everything was good enough and that they shouldn't have separated. But if we think about the feelings and emotions we experienced during endless arguments, difficulties, and shouting, it's likely that good feelings will fade. In this video, I would like to delve more into the topic of why we think the past was better. Generally, this state is often referred to as the baby duck syndrome. In most cases, this term implies that the first experience was much better than all subsequent ones. The first two-wheeled bicycle is the fastest of all. Bruce Lee's movies were more interesting than today's. Music on vinyl records was more inspiring, unlike the music of today's artists. In general, life was brighter in the past. This effect was discovered by the Austrian zoologist Konrad Lorenz, observing hatching goslings that took the first seen object as their mother. Whether it's the goose itself, a rubber ball, a dog, or a person, the gosling will follow it throughout its childhood. Honestly, this effect should have been called the goose syndrome, but for a more euphonic term, it was named the baby duck syndrome, and also ducklings behave exactly like goslings. However, whether ducklings or goslings, we haven't come far from them. This psychological phenomenon is encountered to varying degrees by the vast majority of people, more often in older individuals and those living in a conservative society or environment. The degree of expression also depends on the flexibility of the mind or neuroplasticity. If a person is open to new things, enjoys exploring various phenomena and perspectives, they are less likely to suffer from this syndrome. Actually, it's not advisable to treat such a syndrome as something unserious, as it has a significant impact on a person. Instead of the joking duckling syndrome, you can use the more official term for the syndrome, imprinting. The subtlety of imprinting lies in the fact that a person doesn't notice how they come under its influence. The syndrome can have a situational or episodic effect, manifesting only in certain situations, or it can have a chronic nature when absolutely everything new is perceived negatively. So, why does this happen? Let's delve into the neurology of the problem. When a person encounters something new that brings them pleasure, new neural connections are formed, accompanied by a release of dopamine, the happiness hormone. When encountering something similar later on, new neural connections are formed not as strongly, and the person may not feel the same sensations. They feel confusion and incomprehension. Consequently, the feeling arises that the very first experience was the most correct, leading to a stable position that it's better not to change anything and stay in the same. Often the prerequisites for such a state arise in childhood and depend on the living environment in which a person grew up. For example, children who grew up in a certain type of isolation from the outside world tend to develop this syndrome. According to psychologists' observations, over time, people susceptible to this syndrome become despotic. They start lecturing people, including strangers, insist rigidly on their most correct point of view, and as a result, those around them turn away, leaving such individuals lonely and fostering even greater despotism. Other problems that can result from imprinting include relationship issues. When a person spends their entire life trying to find someone similar to their first love, and when they find it, realizes that it's still not the same. Problems with career development can also arise when a person refuses to change a job they hate because they've been there for 15 years or because they have a qualification in that field. They may also resist climbing the career ladder because they already know everything there and somewhere else is seen as a dangerous unknown. In general, the situation is as follows. The first experience triggers the greatest release of happiness hormones in us, making it the most memorable compared to all subsequent ones. New patterns are also formed in our brain, and our brain cells experience greater growth. This leads to the formation of stable connections that, upon subsequent occurrences, do not evoke the same impressions. Pathological fixation on the past, both practically and theoretically, can be present in each of us. For instance, if you take away someone's favorite dish that their grandmother used to cook, they will mournfully reminisce about it because it was so delicious. However, if you put that dish and a restaurant salad in front of them and let them taste both, it's not guaranteed that the grandmother's pie will be tastier. This is because the first experience creates the greatest happiness hormone surge, making it the most significant memory compared to all subsequent ones. One of the most common reasons for looking back is disappointment in the present and a lack of belief in the possibility of change. For example, a person considering their college years the best in their life is likely nostalgic for their internal state, the sense of freedom they experienced, and the ability to behave as they truly wanted. As people age, they suppress their emotions more, lose the ease and joy of life, and try to be overly serious. For those who don't find a way to understand themselves, connect with their inner child, and express themselves as they wish, the only choice is to reminisce about a time when they gave themselves permission to behave freely. Reality can be harsh, and past years may be perceived as cloudless. Here, a cognitive distortion called Rosy retrospection comes into play. As the name suggests, it means that a person perceives events in their life more positively than when they experienced them. Negative thoughts and emotions are erased, leaving only positive memories in the mind. People start perceiving the past as objectively better and believe that everything was better in the past. In addition to this, our lives are constantly changing, and the inability to adapt to new conditions can have a detrimental effect on us. Human life is long enough, and over its course, the world undergoes significant changes. In addition to global events, numerous small-scale changes occur that only affect specific individuals. Not all of them are easy to accept and endure. Some people struggle with the collapse of political systems, others with breakups or retirement. The inability to accept reality as it is, and to experience one's feelings about it often leads a person to chew endlessly on mental reminiscence of the past. Simultaneously, they shift the focus onto external circumstances and forget that the responsibility for their life and personal happiness lies with them, not in the place or time they inhabit. In essence, during times of change, people behave like the two frogs in the fable. Both find themselves in a pot of sour cream and life difficulties. However, one accepts the conditions of the game, struggles until it overturns the lump of butter with its legs, and leaps out. The other drowns in memories. Often, it's much easier to do the latter. For example, why bother mastering gadgets and staying competitive in the job market when you can lament how wonderful life was without them? Blaming the times for not going the way one wanted is simpler. The reluctance to take responsibility for one's life is often associated with frequent nostalgia for childhood and youth. It was a carefree time when problems were few, and someone else solved them. Maybe life wasn't better then, but it was definitely simpler. While understanding one's own past is somewhat clear, there are situations where a person idealizes an era they couldn't experience due to their age. You've probably seen people yearning for a past life. Men were real knights then, and women gave birth to 15 children and then knew their place. In reality, none of that ever happened. It's a yearning for a world that never existed, a world of illusions. A person creates their own mental space and places it in an era or territory that seems fitting. However, it has little to do with reality. Often a shallow investigation into statistics and research can debunk these misconceptions, though it's unlikely to help. Moreover, people prone to such narratives develop a fear of the future. The unknown is frightening. It's much more pleasant to return to what's familiar, even if only in thought. Strangely, confidence in an unfavorable outcome seems better than uncertainty. For instance, a 2016 study found a correlation between uncertainty and stress levels. Participants were asked to play a computer game where they had to flip stones, with each stone potentially hiding a snake. Players encountering a snake received an electric shock. During the experiment, researchers tracked stress levels using various physiological indicators, including sweating and pupil dilation. They also asked participants to share when they experienced higher stress levels. The main conclusion was that both subjective and objective indicators of stress reached their peak in conditions of maximum uncertainty. Interestingly, for players, uncertainty was much more stressful than predictable negative outcomes. Therefore, when faced with an unstable present, a person immerses themselves in a known past as a form of protection. This state of instability has its own hue for each person, and sometimes the present doesn't look exactly as imagined. On the contrary, the past seems ideal because we embellish it. For example, if you consider your college years the best in your life, you are likely nostalgic for the internal state, the feeling of freedom when you could behave as you truly wanted. However, remembering the difficult moments and problems makes this illusion quickly disappear. Nevertheless, the present is not that bad. Humanity has overcome infertility, conquered space, and researched various diseases, making pandemics almost impossible. And yes, don't tell me about COVID-19. Recall the Spanish flu just 100 years ago and the countless lives it claimed. Moreover, humans managed to save pandas from extinction. What could be better? So, how can we save ourselves from that little duckling that lives within each of us? It's necessary to constantly analyze your behavior and interests to determine whether you do it because you genuinely enjoy it or because you can't find a substitute. Overcoming the initial aversion to something new reshapes neural connections, making them work, and with a higher probability, this new will eventually be more enjoyable than the old. Also, if you feel you can't handle it on your own or don't want to admit mistakes, talk to a psychologist. They can help close childhood issues that contributed to the development of imprinting. It's time to grow up as individuals, take responsibility for your life, and most importantly, for your present. Reflecting on carefree years when decisions weren't necessary, a person escapes from reality and adopts a child's position. But in reality, by accepting reality as it is and realizing that everything depends on you, you take a step toward freedom. Become free from your own self